Can you get me a text, Linda?
Sure.
Thank you.
It's not going, you never go.
Thank you. Is there anyone who does not have a text? So there are many ways to approach the practice of Chenrezig. With some tongue-in-cheek, we could say some of them are functional. There are a few things that are really very useful to understand or to recall, depending upon where you are with these things. One of the most important things to understand is that the practice of Chenrezig is not about supplanting our bad attitudes and anger and unfair relationships with each other and so on. More, it is about a ritual recognition of our own inherent purity. So I say ritual recognition because the ritual itself is not the recognition. But if you think about your own life, it should be easy to see that you live in a ritual, that your daily activities are embedded in rituals, most of which you yourself designed. How you make your breakfast, who you talk to or don't talk to in the mornings, whether you feel good in the morning or don't. We can think of all of these as ritual in the sense that they follow a kind of pattern. What we're fundamentally and most profoundly interested in is doing whatever it takes to recognize that inherent, fully realized nature of mind. Really, nothing else matters. It appears historically, once recognized, everything else takes care of itself. The mere recognition is not enough. It also must be stabilized. At any given moment, we could recognize the inherent purity of nature of mind itself. In fact, it's probable that anyone who has paid attention for very long has seen it, even if they didn't recognize it. Kind of like you might see someone who you saw a long time ago, and then you don't recognize them 30 years later when you see them on the street. And of course, we could also ask the question, maybe facetiously, are they actually the same person? They don't look the same. Or from the other side, the person I saw yesterday and easily recognized today, are they the same person? How about those of you who got up and went and used the bathroom? Are you the same person when you come back? We want to approach this ritual with no assumptions. So that's the truth. We would like to approach it with no assumptions. The other truth is that is nearly impossible. So it's important for us to see the assumptions as well as the other things, the opinions that we have about the practice, whether we like it or dislike it, whether we understand it or we're flummoxed by it, like whatever it is. The practice of Chenrezig, like the practice of virtually any Vajrayana or Tantric tradition, is a practice in exploration of our own minds. So there are many things that we need to do on the way to engaging in the practice, and one of them begins on page 1, surprisingly. Especially if you're familiar with Vajrayana practices, nothing begins on page 1. So, and normally we don't start on page 1 either, but just because it's so much fun to break tradition, I thought we would do this. Now, page 1 through, let's just say page, what is it here? Through page 7, say page 6, let's say, is a prayer to the Lamas of the Mahamudra lineage. So if you think about this, each piece of it, if we stop and just ask, why are we doing this piece? We can see something, some reason why we're doing it. And that reason can help us relate to what it is we're doing. On page 1 through 6, we have a long list of names. Names that, unless you're already familiar with them, you will never recognize them. They're not Bob and Mary and Susan and Jim. They're all in transliterated Sanskrit. And if you don't know the history of those people, that doesn't mean much either. However, what we're actually doing here is acknowledging relationship, acknowledging connection. And on top of acknowledging the connection that is already there, we are also taking steps to nurture that connection even further. Because all of the practices came from somewhere, which translates into came from someone. And those people, then, we start by giving rise to a sense of gratitude for having the opportunity to engage in practices that have been shown over centuries, many centuries, millennia even, to be effective. So, in other words, we have gift in front of us. Are we going to pick it up and use it? The answer is yes, we're going to do that. And we start by saying, thank you very much for the opportunity to engage in this practice. So, since we don't know them, and we would all like to be delighted by having met them, we will do these first 6 pages by singing them.
Zam Chenrezig
Take a moment and relax your mind. And if it might be helpful, stretch your body a little bit. In the ordinary course of our life, we meet many people, people of different shapes, forms, genders, and persuasions. And on occasion we meet someone who impresses us. And we want to know how they came to be like that, and how we might be more like that. So as we move along here, if you're familiar with the practice of Chenrezig, then I thought to challenge you a little bit today with some different approaches, and at the same time maybe make things more accessible for those of you who are not familiar with the practice. So we will turn now to page 9. Actually, we're going to skip page 9. We're going to page 11. Now, one of the things that people who are familiar with Chenrezig will say is that reciting the text in Tibetan and knowing the melody, even if you're alone, that can be a support for engaging in the practice. So let's remind ourselves also that even though within the context of the ritual there is a place in which we become Chenrezig, to speak loosely. In truth, we are not becoming Chenrezig. We are recognizing what always was. There's a big difference between those two. So one way that we can capture this feeling is, first of all, because most of us are not familiar with the Tibetan language. Even if we've recited the Tibetan sounds while we engage in the practice, we may not be competent in understanding the Tibetan. So we begin then here on the refuge part of this practice with reciting first in English, a couple of times in English, which is the same refuge that we took before, a couple of times in English, and then we'll recite in Tibetan. So now we have to challenge you also. It's recognizing our actual nature as Chenrezig requires more than one step. So we begin by imagining in the sky in front of us the appearance of Chenrezig. Now, if you know the form of Chenrezig, that's helpful. If you have a picture of Chenrezig, that's helpful, but utterly not necessary. Which is not to say I recommend against having a picture, it's just not necessary. We visualize in front of ourselves an image, kind of in front and above, kind of in the sky, if you will, a little bit. An image of Chenrezig who is sitting on an open lotus, and on that lotus rests a disc, a white disc, which we call a moon disc, and Chenrezig sits on that moon disc, legs crossed, and in his hands, his first two hands, he has four hands, so his first two hands hold a wish-fulfilling jewel, and he has two other hands which have meanings which we'll repeat again. The forearms together represent what we call the four immeasurables. From Chenrezig's realization of bodhicitta, the very essence of bodhicitta, his compassion for the suffering of others is immeasurable. Not merely immeasurable in terms of his own sense of compassion, but immeasurable in the sense that it's directed to all beings without exception. Immeasurable, uncountable beings. His loving kindness for all beings and caring for all beings is likewise immeasurable. His joy in the potential and actual realization of each person's realization of their own nature is also immeasurable. And it hardly bears repetition that so is his equanimity in relationship to all sentient beings. So as we recite the English for the refuge, we keep this image of Chenrezig and our kind of loosely held understanding of what Chenrezig is about in front of ourselves as we turn our minds to refuge in the three jewels. First in English, twice, and once in Tibetan.
Until enlightenment,
I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings.
until
Samgye Chunam Sokhi Chunam Vajam Chuvayudani Rasuchi Dadi Sochi Pe Sonam Ki Drola Enche Sanjay Rumajo. Again, just a moment. Relax the mind. Put aside, let go of the meditation even. Relax the body, the mind, and of course the speech. Now we have on page 12 the section which is called, begins the section which is called the generation phase. Even though we generated a vision of Chenrezig in the sky in front, we are going to be a little more precise at this point. And again, the ideal here is that we are primarily reminding ourselves of our inherent nature. Definitely we are not merely planting the seed of full realization, but planting the realization that we are each fully endowed with this fully awakened mind. Our job is to recognize it and stabilize that recognition. So first, let's go through the English. We'll go through the English all the way over to page 14 one time, and then we'll stop and come back and we'll have a few things to say about it.
on the
Myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is the lotus and moon seat. From the tree appears the noble Chenrezig, clear, white, and radiating five-colored light. Smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes, the first pair of his four hands are joined together. The lower two hold a crystal mala and a white lotus. Adorned with jewels and silk, he wears a deerskin upper garment. His head ornament is Amitabha, and his two legs sit in the Vajra asana. A stainless moon supports his back. He is the embodiment and essence of all sources of refuge. Of the many things that might be considered a truth in this tradition, one of the most clear is what we call the truth of interdependence. As we engage in this practice, even just up to this point, our mindset of the day changes. Each time we sing something that we've not heard before, we are affected by it. Our job when we are affected by it is to see that effect, witness it in our own mind stream, not just let it go by, but see it. So here, when we say, on the crown of myself and sentient beings, there is an underlying assumption which is not stated in the text. Fortunately or unfortunately, that is a pervasive theme. That things are not stated in the text, but we're expected to know them. So little by little, we will fill in the gaps. Not all today, but over time. When it says, on the crown of myself and sentient beings, we are meant to imagine that we are literally surrounded in this very moment by uncountable beings, surrounded by them, as if we were on some vast plain in some imaginary world, and there were uncountable sentient beings everywhere, like animals on the savannah in Africa, might at various times gather together. Magnify this by an infinite amount, and we are right in the middle of all of these sentient beings. Some of them happy, some of them miserable, many of them just going about their business. And we find ourselves in that place as if it was a dream, except we do not experience it as a dream. We experience it as a phenomena which appears to us as real. So now, seeing this and witnessing this, we imagine on the crown of our own heads a lotus appears just hovering above, some say as much as 2 feet above, somewhere above our head. It's not sitting on our head, it's above our head a little bit. And the text says, and you will find many descriptions of this that are a little different, so I'm just taking it kind of as straight and short as possible. On the crown of myself and sentient beings pervasive as space as a lotus and moon seat. So we imagine that on the crown of my head there is this lotus and moon seat, and on the crown of the head of all sentient beings there is a lotus and moon seat. We imagine that just like that. The snap of the fingers, it's there. We don't need to construct it any more than when we look in the mirror in the morning. We need to construct our face and put a nose on it and eyes and ears and all. We know it immediately. So we're meant to know this immediately and just hold it as we've said. Now on that lotus and moon seat, on the crown of our own head, and also on the crown of the head of all sentient beings, is a letter, a symbol. And the symbol has the name Hri, like the letter of an alphabet, like H-R-I. But that's just to say what the sound is. The letter maybe is about the size of your finger. And it has a certain shape, which if you know it, you visualize it. If you don't, you can learn it later. For now, you can think of it as a point of light. A point of light which is maybe a little larger than a lentil, quite small. And it is so brilliant that it competes with the brilliance of the sun. That light shines. So then in the text it says, from the Hri appears the noble Chenrezig. Now, there's more to it than that. From that Hri, or that point of light, in this case, if you don't know the letter, the light shines out, and the light fills all of space. And in that all of space, there are many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And by virtue of that light going out that we imagine, we make connection with all of those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the same way as if we were to walk down the street and see each other and just say hello. In the moment of saying hello, we have an experience, right? It's just an experience. We don't need to talk about it. It's just a passing event. And in this case, we have the experience of the light going out from the Hri, striking the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who respond with blessings in the form of light returning. Those blessings enter that Hri from which the light originated. Now it enters the Hri, and the Hri instantly appears as Chenrezig on the crown of our heads. So think of this as an ongoing, nurturing ritual of connection. In the same way, really analogous to when we see each other, we say hello. We say hello. And when we meet somebody we haven't met before, we shake their hand, or we give them an embrace, or there's something that we do. So here the ritual is, the light goes out, the blessings come back in the form of light, and that light transforms that Hri. It really doesn't transform the Hri. It makes visible to us what it always was. That Hri is the nature of our own mind, and it is also the nature of Chenrezig. So that Chenrezig now appears on the crown of our head, sitting on this lotus and moon seat. So if you can know that much, you can look in a book and see the different rituals that are associated with that transformation or that recognition, and you can work with those things and elaborate on them if you so wish. Then it says, smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes. Chenrezig, it's talking about. First pair of his four hands are joined together. He's actually holding a wish-fulfilling jewel in those hands. The lower two hold a crystal mala. Mala is a rosary with 108 beads on it. The crystal mala that Chenrezig holds indicates or tells us that he is capable of attracting or magnetizing sentient beings from the depths of suffering, from all the different realms of experience in this world, and all of the suffering that sentient beings experience and have no sense of where it comes from that place which we might call a hell realm. Chenrezig is capable of magnetizing, of drawing those beings from those realms. And the mala represents that force. Continuing on, he is adorned with jewels and silk, and he wears a deerskin upper garment. The silks are 5 colors, because the Buddha families, of which Chenrezig is a member of, those. The Buddha families are symbolized by 5 different colors: blue and red and green and white and yellow. And so he is adorned in the 5 colored silks to represent his participation in those 5 families. He wears a deerskin upper garment, which was not actually killed for the sake of this ritual, but rather the deer represents kind of mythical, which doesn't mean unreal, but a mythical ability. And there's stories about this deer. They all basically come down to, in the midst of conflict, this deer has the ability to enter into that conflict, and by virtue of its presence in various ways, as the stories are told, the conflict is completely subdued. So the deerskin upper garment represents that ability, and that kind of magical ability, if you will. Continuing on to the next page. He has an ornament on the crown of his head. The ornament is one of the 5 Buddha families, Amitabha. And so the Buddha Amitabha rests on Chenrezig, the crown of Chenrezig's head, much in the same way that Chenrezig rests on our head. And so the Buddha Amitabha then is in a certain way analogous for us, or an analog of this, of what we're doing. For Chenrezig, the Buddha Amitabha is his guru, his teacher, the person, the way that he relates to his own realization. Chenrezig is also simultaneously an emanation of Amitabha, as well as Chenrezig. So, continuing with the Buddha Amitabha on the crown of his head, his 2 legs sit in the Vajrasana, which is to say they're crossed over each other. Often we call it the lotus position. A stainless moon supports his back, so a kind of on its side vertical moon behind Chenrezig indicates that the aspiration bodhicitta and the realization of compassion at all levels is completely permeating his stream of being. He is the embodiment and essence of all refuges. So the 3 jewels, Chenrezig embodies the essence of all 3 refuges. So let's now recite this from page 12 to page 14 in Tibetan. And let's do it slightly differently. We already read the visualization, so let's leave that where it is. And now let's read in English together the homage to Chenrezig. So I always like to say that if you engage in this practice and you had the experience of Chenrezig appearing on the crown of your head and on the crown of the heads of all sentient beings, you would feel like you needed to do something about that. And what we do about that at this point is we pay homage to Chenrezig, who is the embodiment and the cause behind all of the things that we're doing. So we'll recite page 15 one time in English, and then we'll sing it twice in Tibetan.
Noble one,
Untainted by the mire, your form is
luminous white.
the perfect awakened one adorns your head. With the eyes of compassion you gaze upon beings, to Chenrezig we bow. Kunji Makukudo Kazo Sanjiti Ulajin Tuje Chenji Rolazi Chenrezig Vajazel Jo Kunji Makukudo Kazo Sanjiti Ulajin Tuje Chenji Rolazi Chenrezig Vajazel. At this moment then, we're going to take another short break before for the third session, which will be just before lunch. So if you can come back in 5 or 10 minutes, that'd be good, and we'll finish up before the lunch break. Oh, one thing. One good thing. Tradition is, generally speaking, if you're engaged in a practice like this, and then of course you need to get up and go and use the restroom, or even have lunch or something, then it's helpful if you can make an effort to maintain continuity, establish that by maintaining the visualization of Chenrezig on the crown of the head. So that's very difficult to maintain that stable. So there's no problem with that, but as you recall that that's what you're trying to do, then reestablish it just over and over, not going through the whole ritual of putting the arms and the noses and everything together. Just recall it instantly, like you would recall your mother's face, without having to do anything to make it. It just is there. Okay?